What happens when the very people who spend years aggressively turning up the political thermostat suddenly clutch their pearls and complain about the heat? Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are diving into an explosive and deeply revealing segment from Piers Morgan Uncensored. In the wake of the tragic and shocking assassination of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk, the national conversation around political violence has reached an absolute boiling point. But instead of genuine reflection, what we watched unfold on this panel was a masterclass in partisan blindness. We saw conservative commentators attempt to weaponize a very real tragedy, trying to rewrite history by painting the dehumanization of political opponents as a uniquely left-wing sickness. That is, until journalist Lewis Goodall stepped in. Without excusing the grotesque celebrations coming from far-left internet trolls, Goodall completely dismantled the room by holding a massive mirror up to the staggering, undeniable hypocrisy of the political right. It was one of the most intellectually honest reality checks on modern television. Before we break down exactly how Goodall exposed the absolute bankruptcy of this one-sided outrage, do me a favor, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you are watching from in the comment section.
Thank you so much for having me, Piers. It's obviously still very raw for a lot of us. I'm finding myself very caught between, on the one hand, wanting to honor his legacy of unity through debate and coming together to take down the temperature, and then wanting to honor his legacy of telling the truth. And the truth is, this is not a both sides issue. The killer killed him, according to police reports, because he found Charlie Kirk to be spreading hate. This is a view shared by every single prominent Democrat. Yes, there are people on Blue Sky advocating for violence, but what actually caused this was the utterly quotidian, utterly ubiquitous demonization of the political opposition from the left. And it has just led to violence because they said the other side were Hitler and Nazis. They said that speech is violence. To combine those two things together is to sign the death warrant of prominent conservatives. And that is what we are seeing again and again and again. And it is utterly facetious to suggest that there is any comparison between political violence on both sides. Every example they bring is not actually showing that, whether it's Governor Shapiro, whose attempted assassination was from a Free Palestine leftist, or whether it was the Minnesota assassinations, which were from somebody who said he was operating at the behest of Democrat Governor Tim Walz. There is a culture among Democrats at the highest level to suggest that their political opposition are a danger, and that suggests that their lives are forfeit. And I want to come together. I do. I love what Shank said. It brought tears to my eyes. I had to reach for a tissue while you were playing Charlie's words. But at the same time, we cannot unite with people who are lying to our faces about who we are, who will not take responsibility for the fact that they suggested that we are Nazis because of totally legitimate views that reflect the majority of Americans. So what I say is, let the left say we were wrong. It is legitimate to vote for Donald Trump. It is legitimate to be pro-life. It is legitimate to believe that there are only two genders, and we were wrong to suggest that that was not the case. We were wrong to say that that is hateful. When they say that, I am waiting with open arms to take down the temperature.
Lewis Goodall, you are on the left, and the one thing that's really struck me about this, I don't dispute for a moment that there are people on the far right that commit a lot of acts of violence and can be equally hateful. That's my personal view. But I have been truly shocked, genuinely truly shocked, by the sheer enormity of brazen, dehumanized calls on social media from people on the woke left, the sort of far left, which has been calling themselves progressive, but in my view are the opposite. But how they've reacted to Charlie Kirk's death, we've got a little mashup of some of it.
Ding dong, the witch is dead.
We think that Charlie Kirk
just got shot in the neck. Ay, ooh, ah, ooh.
I would say pour one out for Kirky Boy, but I don't waste good beer on little bitches.
Charlie Kirk just got put down like a fucking dog in Utah, and I could not be happier.
I will not ever feel bad when bad people get what the fuck they deserve.
Fucking stoked right now. You wanna know why I'm so fucking stoked? Fucking yeah!
CK got AK'd. And he's gone.
He did say that gun deaths were an acceptable side effect of gun rights.
We got Charlie and the neck. We got Charlie and the neck.
There are hundreds, thousands maybe, more examples like this. But we've seen teachers, we've seen hospital executives, we've seen people who want to run places like the Oxford University Union, for example, and so on, all coming out with similar gleeful celebration at the murder of a 31-year-old father of two young children. I find it utterly despicable, but also quite terrifying, actually, that they're so brazenly doing this. What is your reaction to that?
Well, Piers, my reaction is that I think it's reprehensible. And I think it is part of a much wider pattern of behaviour driven by partly social media, but in particular the hyperpolarisation of American politics, which is part of a big trend of legitimising violence, of making violence an acceptable means of prosecuting your politics. Where I would disagree, possibly with you, possibly with other members of the panel, is that this is somehow just confined to the left, or the idea that this is just happening on the left. Yes, there have been examples of that. We've just seen it just now. I was disgusted at the reaction to what happened with Luigi Manzioni earlier in the year. Very similar sort of phenomenon.
Yeah.
But let's see where it's happened in other parts of the right. Do you remember what happened with Paul Pelosi, for example? Nancy Pelosi's husband almost killed to death. What was the reaction of not just some random left-wing accounts, not some teacher, not whatever, but Don Jr., Donald Trump Jr. He decided to put out a picture of a hammer and some underpants and say, I've got my Paul Pelosi Halloween costume tonight. This is the wider legitimization of violence that we're seeing. And let's just have a look. I mean, let's talk about some accounts that I've been looking at. You've been horrified what you've seen on Twitter, some stuff I've seen on Blue Sky, some stuff I've seen on X over the course of the last 24 hours. Liberals can never be allowed to run this country again. How can you coexist with people that want to murder you? If you vote Democrat at this point, you're a demonic, evil person. I will support whatever saves our country. Trump has a blank check as far as I'm concerned. I could go on, I could go on, and I could go on. And I could give a list of all of the many occasions we've seen in recent years of right-wing, hard-right, far-right terrorism that we saw against what happened in Minnesota. I mentioned Paul Pelosi, Josh Shapiro. In fact, I disagree with just as a matter of fact. Investigators found in the Shapiro case online activity and writings that included extreme right-wing, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and rhetoric against Shapiro, who is, of course, Jewish and a Democrat, and in Michigan. And even in the last 24 hours or so, what do we see from Laura Loomer on Ilhan Omar, the Democratic Congresswoman, Laura Loomer being a very senior MAGA person? At the end of the day, everyone needs to realise that Ilhan Omar is a bloodthirsty Muslim terrorist sympathiser who has no place in our country. Her presence in Congress is a national security threat, and she's an enemy from within. So please, the idea that there is some sort of asymmetry on this, the fact of the matter is, America, and indeed the UK as well, we've got into a really negative cycle here, where basically the temperature goes up, and it goes up, and it goes up. And then sometimes some of the people who are responsible for that turn around and go, God, I can't believe it's so hot in here. Everyone needs to pull back from the brink. Social media needs to actually be reformed and needs to be changed. Elon Musk has been pretty responsible for some of this stuff that we've seen as well. So let's not pretend. If we pretend that this is just a problem of the left or of liberalism or of wokeism or whatever you want to say, this problem is not going to be any better or get any better. Let's use this as a moment for all of us to look within ourselves and decide to be better.
The panel was discussing the tragic and terrifying targeting of Charlie Kirk. And let me be perfectly clear right out of the gate. Political violence is abhorrent. Piers Morgan played a montage of social media reactions from far-left accounts celebrating the attempt on Kirk's life, and it was genuinely stomach-churning. Watching people dance, laugh, and cheer over a political opponent being shot shows a completely broken moral compass. Piers was entirely right to call it out as despicable. There is absolutely no justification for that kind of depravity. Period. But where this conversation goes completely off the rails is the attempt by the right-wing pain lists to frame this as an exclusively left-wing phenomenon. We had commentators sitting there with a straight face, claiming that the demonization of political opponents is a uniquely left-wing strategy, suggesting that because liberals call conservatives fascists, they are essentially signing death warrants. And this is where Lewis Goodall steps in and absolutely dismantles the room. Goodall doesn't defend the gross behavior on the left, he condemns it, but he brilliantly holds a mirror up to the staggering, undeniable hypocrisy of the political right. Let's look at the facts. The idea that the political right has clean hands when it comes to legitimizing violence is completely detached from reality. Goodall reminds the panel of the brutal attack on Paul Pelosi. When Nancy Pelosi's husband had his skull fractured by a hammer-wielding maniac, we didn't see universal, solemn condemnation from the right. What did we see? We saw Donald Trump Jr. posting a picture of a hammer and a pair of underwear, mocking the near-fatal assault as a Halloween costume. When high-profile MAGA figures like Laura Loomer openly called Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar a bloodthirsty Muslim terrorist sympathizer, is that not dehumanization? Is that not putting a target on someone's back? The right-wing online space is completely saturated with rhetoric claiming that Democrats are literally demonic, that they are groomers, and that they are an existential, evil threat that must be eradicated to save the country. Goodall hits the nail directly on the head. You cannot spend years telling your base that the opposition is an apocalyptic evil, and then clutch your pearls when the political temperature boils over. It is a bizarre, deeply cynical cycle. The very same political faction that loves to aggressively crank up the thermostat is suddenly gasping in performative shock at how hot it is in the room. You do not get to traffic in stochastic terrorism, mock the victims of right-wing violence, and then demand civility only when the violence points in your direction. The truth is, political violence is a rot that is poisoning the entire system. But pretending it only comes from one side doesn't solve the problem. It just provides cover for the extremists in your own camp. Goodall was the only one on that panel willing to call out the hypocrisy, and it was a masterclass in holding partisans accountable to reality. What do you guys think? Was Goodall spot on, or are we missing the bigger picture? Let me know your raw thoughts in the comments below. If you appreciated this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.